Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the source materials you've been looking into, pull out the core insights, and basically give you a shortcut to understanding some really complex stuff. Maybe spark a few aha moments along the way.
And today we're diving into Pietro Ubaldi's Human Ascensions. It's quite a wide-ranging work, as you know. He connects, well, almost everything, science, religion, social trends, through his idea of universal laws.
Exactly. And your mission, our listener, and you've accepted it by sending this to us, is to get a really solid grasp of Ubaldi's take on unity, conflict, and how we evolve, as people and as a whole society.
We want to help you see the interconnectedness he talks about, get beyond those fragmented views we often get stuck with.
Yeah, and hopefully uncover some maybe surprising ideas about progress and conflict. So Ubaldi really kicks things off with a big one, this underlying unity in everything.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How he argues that even though fields like religion, philosophy, science seem so different, maybe even opposed,
Right, they often clash.
they do. But he says they're all ultimately trying to map the same reality, the same unified universe,
Yeah.
like explorers drawing different parts of the same map.
And he thinks the disagreements we see now, that's just because these fields are still relatively young in their development. He calls them involuted and elementary.
Precisely. It's a phase. Ubaldi believes as they mature, as they go deeper, they'll naturally start to converge. They'll end up revealing the same fundamental truths from different angles.
So the takeaway is these aren't really opposing forces, but maybe different stages on the same journey towards understanding.
That's the idea. It suggests we should see a progression, not just conflict.
Which really speaks to that need we have to piece things together, right? To
Yeah.
see the bigger picture behind all the different viewpoints, like the cosmic puzzle pieces eventually fitting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to get a better handle on this unity, Ubaldi talks about synthetic versus analytic thinking.
Yeah, this is crucial for understanding it. He really pushes for viewing the universe synthetically as one whole, interconnected, almost living system.
Instead of the analytic way, which is more about breaking things down into separate bits.
Exactly. Like trying to understand an orchestra by listening to just the violins, then just the trumpets, instead of hearing the whole symphony together.
And he argues it's actually really hard to truly isolate anything because everything's connected, like one wave is part of the whole ocean.
Precisely. You can't really understand the wave without the ocean context. And thinking bigger picture, for you, our listener, if you're feeling overwhelmed by information.
Which is easy to do these days.
Right. Ubaldi's synthetic view is like a way to rise above the noise, see the patterns, the connections.
See the whole tapestry, not just the single threads. Okay, but Ubaldi isn't just talking theory here. He thinks these ideas need to be lived.
Yes, this lived knowledge is key. He really stresses that just reading about these concepts isn't enough. You have to engage with them, apply them, see how they work in your own experience.
He uses these really active terms like concepts, action, thought force. Like the ideas themselves have energy.
And concepts germ, like seeds that need fertile ground or engagement to actually sprout and develop.
So it prompts a question for you, the listener. How do these ideas about unity and connection feel in your own life? Do they resonate? Have you had those moments where things just clicked?
It's definitely something to chew on.
Absolutely. Now, Ubaldi also talks about these big currents in human history. He calls them involutive and evolutive.
Right. He sees these as two major forces kind of opposing but interacting, shaping our path. The involutive one, that's more about things like excessive individualism that leads to division,
Yeah.
conflict, even competing empires or power blocks on a global scale.
Like nations getting so focused on themselves they clash.
Exactly. But then there's the evolutive current. That's marked by things like scientific progress, potentially leading to deeper spiritual insights, communication tech bridging gaps, people forming larger groups.
And even, he says, a need for faith that comes out of shared suffering.
Yes. And significantly, Ubaldi argues that the next big era, the new era, will be defined by unification and universality. He even sees destructive forces, paradoxically, pushing us towards this larger unity eventually.
Which connects directly to the listener's interest in where society is heading, right? He's painting this picture, despite all the conflict, of an underlying movement towards connection. Speaking of connection, he has some interesting things to say about love, egoism, and this idea of the foreigner.
Yeah, he observes how even something positive like patriotism, love of country, can get twisted. In that involuted state, it can turn into suspicion, hatred, even war against those seen as other, as foreign.
Like drawing the circle around us too tightly.
Exactly. But he also sees a counter-trend happening now, a growing sense of shared humanity, this idea of a bigger homeland that includes everyone.
So how does he frame that shift?
He actually sees it as an evolution of egoism itself. Initially, it's focused just on the self, then maybe the family, the tribe, the nation. But it gradually expands. Ideally, it keeps expanding until it encompasses all of humanity.
So our sense of us gets wider over time. Interesting. Now, Ubaldi doesn't pull any punches when describing the limitations of the involuted individual.
No, he doesn't. He paints a pretty stark picture. Someone driven mainly by ambition, focused on temporary material stuff, unable to grasp a larger, more enduring reality. They're kind of stuck in a narrow self-interest loop.
Which leaves them feeling unsatisfied.
Perpetually unsatisfied, yeah. And if a world is mostly made up of such individuals, he says it becomes like a pack of wolves, driven by this selfish spirit of revolt, leading to chaos and conflict.
And he points out that they become victims of their own game, right?
Exactly. The methods they use ultimately rebound on them. It's a kind of self-defeating cycle.
A trap. Now, he contrasts this with a pretty fundamental shift, moving from taking to giving.
Yeah, he really emphasizes how futile purely material pursuits are in the long run. They create enemies, spark conflict, leave you feeling empty. It's the path of those who haven't grasped something deeper.
And he describes this turning point where we start seeing the limits of that and look for something more. That's the evolutionary shift.
That's the shift. Away from constantly needing to get towards wanting to contribute. It's a total reversal of focus. From the outside to the inside, from fleeting material things to lasting spiritual richness.
And he sees negative impulses actually transforming.
Yes, hatred into love, force into understanding, isolation into unity, war into collaboration. It's a vision of interchange creating outer harmony.
But he's very clear this kind of real solidarity, it can't just be forced on people.
Absolutely not. Ubaldi is adamant. True unity, real brotherhood, it has to come from within, from inner growth, deep conviction in each person.
And he looks at history, at empires trying to force unity.
And sees them as ultimately failing because they lacked that essential inner foundation.
Yeah.
You can't build lasting unity on coercion.
So what are the guiding principles for someone who has made that inner shift? Ubaldi suggests a complete reorientation.
Definitely. He says the evolved person operates from altruism, not egoism. Sacrifice and love become the driving forces, replacing the old might makes right idea.
Priorities get flipped.
Completely. The spirit takes precedence over the body. Earth stops being just a battleground for resources and becomes a place for service, for mission. Material stuff just loses its grip.
And he makes that strong claim. Those chasing dominance and wealth are actually on a declining path, while the givers, the sacrificers, are on the path of ascent, of unification.
Now, you might hear that and think, okay, that sounds a bit utopian.
Yeah, a little idealistic, maybe.
Ubaldi anticipates that. But he argues that only these evolved individuals, the ones who operate from that different place, have the real power to transform a self-interested world into something collaborative.
He thinks trying to build a collective society with purely self-interested individuals just won't work.
It's doomed to fail, in his view. Because attempts to build purely from egoism, as he calls it, they create instability. There's always this hidden power struggle underneath, undermining real unity.
Which he contrasts with true unity based on free agreement, not force.
Exactly. Which leads him to think about human nature itself, which is, well, complicated.
Right. He points out that we're all a mix, aren't we? Faults and virtues, strengths and weaknesses all tangled up together. It's not black and white.
And he calls this a law of life. Even though we try to separate ourselves, deep down there's this common ground among everyone.
So, given that mix, what's the solution? How do we move forward?
He talks about reciprocal purification. It's this idea that through interaction, the negative aspects in each person get gradually worked out, allowing the best qualities to survive and ultimately benefit humanity's progress.
Okay, so that brings us to how he views big systems like, say, communism and capitalism. He sees them as temporary.
Surprisingly temporary, yes. He argues they're essentially just material tools, transient means, that ultimately serve a much larger universal idea, one already expressed, he says, by spiritual teachings like the gospel.
And he thinks each system has a specific, limited job to do in this bigger process.
That's the interesting part. He sees communism, for example, as sort of reminding people about social justice, economic fairness, core gospel ideas, in his view.
And democracy.
Its role is primarily defending individual liberty, the value of the person, within these larger structures.
But he also thinks their current forms, like Bolshevism or state control for communism, or maybe injustice and plutocracy in some democracies, those specific forms will eventually fade away once their function is done.
Exactly. He sees them as temporary vehicles, not the final destination.
Which really reframes how we might look at current politics and economics, doesn't it? As maybe just phases in a much longer evolution. Now, Ubaldi is pretty clear about the fate of purely material values.
He is. He argues that materialism, as a system, is fundamentally self-destructive, according to these underlying laws of life. It just burns itself out.
Implying that only superior spiritual values, things untouched by physical destruction, will actually last.
That's his assertion. And that only those who align themselves with those values will truly thrive in the long run. He warns against clinging too tightly to earthly things.
It definitely makes you reflect on your own priorities.
It does.
And then there's the role of conflict in all this. It seems counterintuitive, but he sees a purpose there.
Yeah, it's paradoxical. He views the constant tension we see, good versus evil, progress versus regression, as part of a subtle, almost orchestrated mechanism. A wise game of impulses, he calls it.
And he suggests the involuted type, the one focused on immediate, often selfish goals, is often dominant in this struggle.
Often, yes. But unknowingly, they end up serving the larger evolutionary goals of the law, even through their self-interest.
Whereas the evolved person, they see beyond the immediate fight.
They transcend it. They recognize the bigger picture, the perfection as he sees it, of the overall divine plan unfolding through these struggles.
So even conflict isn't meaningless in his view, and the ultimate outcome of all this struggle.
Despite all the appearances, master versus slave, rich versus poor, whatever the conflict is, Ubaldi firmly believes the end result is always a move towards greater unification.
He connects that to what we see happening politically, right? This trend towards bigger and bigger units.
Yes. He even sees the current drive to conquer, to expand influence, as a sort of clumsy early stage of what will eventually become universal brotherhood. It's a roundabout path.
A very roundabout path. So how does this law actually push evolution forward, especially through people who aren't consciously trying to evolve?
It's clever, according to Ubaldi. The law works by creating desires, illusions of personal gain that motivate the involuted. These individuals act out of self-interest, chasing these illusions.
But their actions end up serving the law's larger purpose anyway.
Exactly, even if they have no idea. He uses the analogy of animals fighting over food. Their individual struggle serves the broader ecosystem.
So connecting that back to us, it suggests even actions that seem purely self-serving might unintentionally be part of this bigger evolutionary mechanism.
It's a thought-provoking perspective.
It really is. Now, Ubaldi also talks about the limits of purely material power, and he uses a famous story to illustrate it.
Right, the temptation of Christ in the desert. He uses that to show that the power offered by purely material means, by evil in that story, is ultimately limited. It doesn't encompass the whole of reality.
He argues that these earthly struggles for dominance, for stuff, they belong to a lower realm.
A lower, more superficial realm, yes. Beyond that, life operates on entirely different principles. He keeps coming back to this idea that systems like communism and capitalism are just temporary external forms of one single, deeper progressive movement.
And the way we collaborate now, often through struggle and competition.
That's just a reflection of our current psychological state, he says. But even that struggle is ultimately leading towards a collective consciousness, a kind of global awakening.
Okay, now shifting gears a bit. Ubaldi talks about the structure of the universe itself, specifically regarding equality.
Yes, he asserts that the universe, at its most fundamental level, isn't based on simple equality. Think atoms, molecules, there are inherent differences, hierarchies.
So how does that translate to human society when we talk about striving for equality?
He sees true equality not as a starting point, but as a future goal. Something achievable through individual evolution, through spiritual growth, not something you could just impose by law or force from the outside.
And he even questions if one single model of equality works for everyone.
He does. He suggests that different populations with different biological and psychological makeups might need different approaches to achieve genuine fairness and harmony. It's not necessarily one size fits all.
And regarding power structures, social hierarchies, he sees a biological underpinning there too.
Yes, he argues that state control can't fundamentally change the natural tendency for stronger, more capable individuals or groups to become centers of influence. It's a biological dynamic.
He describes the movement of life as this constant upward flow, with lower social classes rising, reducing formal distances but not eliminating the inherent differences in individual evolutionary progress.
It's a continuous dynamic, a leveling, but not a complete flattening.
Now, what about our beliefs, our ideologies? Are they purely intellectual?
Not according to Ubaldi. He argues that for any ideology to really take hold, it has to connect with fundamental human instincts. Especially, he says, the instinct for possession, for acquiring things as a way to move up.
He contrasts that with something like pure communism, which he suggests would require an almost angelic, completely selfless person to work.
Right. And he questions, realistically, how many people like that exist right now, and whether a system built entirely on that ideal is viable for humanity as we currently are.
It definitely highlights the gap between the ideal and the reality. Now, he uses another analogy, the male and female contributing to new life, to explain how opposing forces interact.
Yes, it's a powerful analogy for synthesis. Just as male and female contributions create new life, he suggests opposing forces in society, like the historical tension between rich and poor, interact to create something new.
A kind of global-level synthesis happening through that tension.
That's the idea. It's about the creative potential that comes from the interplay of apparent opposites.
Okay, so considering these changing forms and interacting forces, Ubaldi points towards something more permanent underneath it all.
He talks about this immanent creative principle, this underlying substance that's indestructible, constantly generating new but temporary forms.
And he describes evolution as this cycle. Individualization, combining things, breaking them down, then reforming them again.
Exactly. Individualize, compose, decompose, recompose. That's the engine of evolution as he sees it.
Which leads him to warn against getting too fixated on the temporary forms.
Yes. Don't mistake the current structure, the current system, for the ultimate reality. Focus on the enduring substance beneath the constant flux.
Look beyond the surface changes, and when he talks about a new era coming,
He emphasizes it's not entirely new, it's a transformation of what already exists, not creation from nothing.
and he sees signs of this in the modern mindset, like being more critical of old narratives.
Yes, that modern critical spirit that questions heroic stories, suspects self-interest behind grand claims, questions traditional authority. He sees that as part of humanity growing up, seeking more space, more freedom.
Like we're outgrowing old clothes, old ways of thinking. Now, how does he view the unfolding of truth itself? Is it all at once?
No, he sees spiritual ascent, the grasping of truth, as happening in stages, gradually.
He uses the analogy of prophets or religious founders. They bring the same core divine message, but it's adapted, clothed in forms suitable for their specific time and people.
Right. And the key, he stresses, is not to confuse the temporary form, the specific dogma or story, with the timeless essence. See them as successive lessons in humanity's ongoing education.
Different grades in the same school, perhaps. Now, thinking about unification again, he observes that in our current involuted state, it often happens through struggle.
Yes, it's another paradox. He says the drive towards unity in this early phase often manifests as conflict. It's like the first clumsy way that separate groups start to interact and eventually merge.
He gives examples from history.
Yeah, barbaric invasions that led to new kingdoms, political and economic imperialism that forced connections, even evangelical missions trying to spread one belief system. All driven, he argues, by this underlying tendency towards expansion and ultimately unity, however messy the process.
So even antagonistic interactions can be a first step towards bringing things together. Now, what about the evolution of ideas themselves?
He suggests that the lesson idea is tied down to our immediate physical, biological terrain, the more power it has to expand, to unify people, and ultimately serve spiritual growth. Abstract principles travel further than purely material concerns,
And he sees religions evolving alongside societies.
mirroring the biological ascent of peoples, he says. Their forms, their hierarchies, their specific doctrines are shaped by the dominant mentalities of their time.
And the flaws we see in religious institutions.
He attributes those to the limitations of the specific era, the human element, not necessarily to fundamental flaws in the original spiritual impulse itself.
Okay. Shifting focus slightly, he really emphasizes the need for harmony between science and religion.
He's adamant about this. He believes true, complete science and true, complete religion must agree. They're just different languages expressing the same divine thought, the same underlying reality.
He uses that metaphor of needing two wings to fly.
Exactly. You need both reason and faith, science and spirituality, for balanced understanding and true progress.
Right.
Relying only on religion leads to superstition. Only on science leads to materialism. Both are incomplete, unbalanced.
You need both prefer stable flight. Now, looking globally, he points out a major division.
Yes, the division between East and West. He sees the East often needing Western scientific methods and advancements, while the West desperately needs the deeper spiritual perspectives and ideals often found in the East.
And he suggests the solution is relatively simple.
A straightforward exchange, essentially. A sharing of their complementary strengths could bridge that gap. It seems obvious, but isn't happening effectively.
Right. Now, regarding religion itself, what does Ubaldi consider true religion?
He's very clear. Any religion used to create separation, hatred, division, that's not true religion in his book. True religion must generate love, harmony, and union.
He's critical of any truth built on condemning others.
Very critical. Truth based on accusation, on declaring others false, is suspect. True religion should unite, not divide.
And how does he see knowledge actually advancing? Is it isolated work?
No, absolutely not. He stresses that progress demands collaboration across all fields, because everything is interconnected. Astronomy helps geology, physics helps biology, philosophy informs theology. They all assist each other constantly.
So a grand synthesis of knowledge.
Can only come from this kind of unified, collaborative effort. No single field holds all the answers.
Now, despite all the divisions we see, Ubaldi believes there's a deep, maybe unconscious, yearning for unity in people.
Yes, he describes us as being united more by shared pain, by force, by circumstance, than by conscious love or understanding, often without even realizing the fundamental divine unity of the universe.
But he hopes for a future where people are conscious of it.
Exactly. He hopes the person of the future will live with that conscious awareness of interconnectedness, unlike our current, often fragmented state.
So what's the path towards that greater awareness, that unity? He points towards inner work, drawing on a specific example.
He emphasizes inner spiritual discipline, following the core teachings of Christ love, unity, selflessness as the way to true freedom and a higher order.
And he believes a universal religion based on these core spiritual principles, uniting all genuinely righteous people regardless of label. That's the only way to achieve real religious unity.
Yes, not through force, not through imposing dogma, but through shared spiritual understanding and genuine fraternity.
Okay. But given the world as it is now, he has a realistic view of our collective spiritual state.
He definitely acknowledges the disastrous spiritual conditions of the majority right now, but he also holds on to the idea of chosen souls.
A minority, perhaps.
A minority, yes, but crucial. Entrusted, he believes, with the salvation and future direction of everyone. He sees Earth as this involuted kingdom where good and evil are deeply intertwined, and negativity often seems dominant.
And these chosen souls act as channels.
As the most permeable channels for divine expression, the anchor points for good. Conversely, those aligned with negativity become channels for destructive forces.
Now, he talks quite a bit about the consequences of egoism, of self-centeredness.
He really stresses that blaming others for our problems is pointless. The core idea is that harming others ultimately harms ourselves. Our well-being is intrinsically tied to the well-being of the whole.
He describes life flowing from a divine source, needing free circulation.
Yes, like a universal current that needs to flow freely with a spirit of brotherhood for joy and vitality to exist.
And egoism, separatism, they block this flow.
He calls them anti-vital obstructions. They create imbalances, stagnation, suffering, like damming a vital river.
So the solution is to follow the roads of love, cultivate altruism.
Exactly. He believes divine energy naturally flows most powerfully through those open channels of giving, relieving suffering, and spreading happiness. It's a fundamental law, in his view.
Okay, but what about our choices? Do we have unlimited free will in this system?
Not unlimited, no. He argues the inherent order in the universe points to a guiding mind, which means our freedom operates within certain boundaries.
So we can choose wrongly, choose evil, and suffer the consequences.
Yes, but that possibility exists within the larger context of our need to learn and grow spiritually. That's our primary purpose here, to learn, to build ourselves.
So our freedom is an absolute power. What is true freedom then, according to Ubaldi?
True freedom isn't ignoring the rules, it's understanding our place within them. We make a mistake, he says. When we think our limited freedom makes us masters of everything, we forget we're part of a larger divine law, and we feel pain when we violate it.
So we're arbiters of our own destiny, but not of everything.
Precisely. And suffering in this view isn't punishment. It's loving guidance, correcting our course, teaching us, leading us towards the happiness we're actually made for. Our instinct to seek happiness isn't wrong.
It's about finding the right way to it, and fulfilling our function is key.
Absolutely crucial. He says the vital current will either push us forward if we're doing our part, or it will oppose us, even break us down if we rebel against our function.
And the value of our work isn't about status.
No, it's about how we do it. Perfection, he says, is fulfilling your specific role in the immense universal concert, the role offered by God, aligned with divine law.
And that alignment is the secret to happiness.
That's what he claims, aligning with your true function within the whole.
Now, he draws a distinction between how divine forces and negative forces operate.
Yes, he says God works silently, from within, deeply, while Satan, or negative forces, operate externally, superficially, on the surface of things.
So God's will is embedded in life itself, manifesting slowly.
Through a slow, silent transformation within events. That's why, he suggests, good is often harder to see initially. It's hidden deep, maturing at the roots, while evil seems more prevalent materially.
But the inner ways of God produce more lasting change.
More substantial and enduring transformations, yes.
Okay, revisiting suffering again, its purpose.
He reiterates, it's not meant to torment us. It's proof of God's goodness, wisdom, care. It guides us, corrects us, teaches us, ultimately pushing us towards happiness.
He sees pain as a reintegration.
A reintegration into the divine life of the universe. A just consequence for freely choosing to violate that universal harmony.
Now, what about our relationship with material things, with possessions?
He stresses detachment. We might use earthly things temporarily, but God is the ultimate owner. We're just administrators, stewards, accountable for how we use what's entrusted to us.
So, treat possessions lightly.
With detachment, yes, as a temporary administrator. And he speaks of the peace that comes from working within God's providence, trusting that what we truly need to do, our life's work, will be provided.
If we're doing our part, our needs will be met.
That's the trust he advocates.
And how does prayer fit into this state of mind?
Prayer from this place is less about words, more about aspiration, felt more than spoken. It should prioritize the spiritual, he says. Ask for material things only if they serve the spiritual purpose. And the intention behind the prayer is critical.
Absolutely. And altruistic intentions are essential.
Okay. He also talks about deepening this connection, this communion.
Yes, he calls it sensitization, a process of becoming more attuned, establishing better communication with the divine, deepening the sensation, moving closer.
He sees this practice as a way for chosen souls, those more spiritually inclined, to elevate themselves.
Right. He believes God actively seeks to reach us, but the channels are often blocked by our own spiritual debris, and negative forces actively work to keep those channels closed.
Mm-hmm. And he emphasizes reflecting on Christ's sacrifice.
Yes, seeking its profound meaning. He sees that contemplation as gradually opening the way to spiritual communion with Christ.
But it's not an easy path initially.
Often difficult and slow, he says, depending on one's inner purity, the state of those channels.
And the foundation for this communion is affinity.
Exactly. The soul is drawn to what it resembles, what it resonates with. Our habitual thoughts, our character, our work, our alignment with higher realms, that all determines our affinity.
So communion is this deep connection, adhesion, fusion, identification based on that resonance.
Yes. A meeting of like minds, like spirits.
And the result of achieving this harmony, what does it do?
He describes a new harmony flooding your being. It affects you spiritually, mentally, even physically, establishing a higher, more beneficial rhythm of life.
And this effect lingers.
It stays as a powerful echo, he says, bringing new vitality, healing moral and material wounds. It's a deep transformation.
Now, he pushes back against dismissing these experiences as just weird brain stuff.
Right. He critiques science for often labeling spiritual sensations as pathological hallucinations. He insists they are real, objective, experimental realities, just supernatural, beyond the perception of those without the developed senses.
But he believes humanity will evolve to understand them.
He does. He thinks we'll eventually develop the capacity.
And he uses the passion and resurrection narratives symbolically again.
Yes, to represent this universal cycle of spiritual life. Moving through darkness, passion, into light, resurrection.
Correlated experiences moving from struggle and sadness to insight and joy.
Exactly. And he sees his own journey mirroring this universal pattern from Christ's life to the life of the world. It's a fractal pattern almost.
And he believes everything, good and evil, follows this maturation process.
A rhythm of transformation and maturation. He connects his own moments of spiritual insight to this idea of resurrection from suffering, both personal and global, a powerful sense of renewal. And his mission in writing this.
He sees it as sowing seeds of understanding, even among people focused on worldly things.
And his hope for the listener.
That you too will ascend, overcome pain, and that this collective ascent will manifest as a new, more evolved civilization.
But he frames this within obedience to a higher will.
Yes. Acknowledging the perfection of the universal order, the need for alignment, his plea comes from love, he says. Love for humanity and danger.
And he speaks of the soul's powerful yearning for God.
Irresistible, he calls it, transcending our own sense of unworthiness. He refers to his own commitment to follow this spiritual path fully.
But what happens if we reject this connection, this divine love?
He believes that as understanding grows, suffering lessens. But God's light seeks entry, and people often keep the doors barred against fraternal love.
We have the freedom to choose, but there are consequences.
Yes. Humanity must learn to accept or reject freely. But he warns that hatred poisons the self, egoism isolates us. We choose our own consequences.
And the current difficult times.
He sees them as a painful but necessary lesson for our collective maturation. Everything trends towards good eventually, he believes. Even evil gets transformed, but always respecting our free will.
He sees a shift happening now, an inversion of route.
Starting in the masses, he says, with a return to religious or spiritual sentiment. Maybe even what looks like extremism is part of this larger turning.
And a weariness with conflict.
Yes, a growing exhaustion with the results of universal ferocity, leading to a new desire, a new ideal of harmonious cooperation.
Contrasting the old hero, the warrior, with a new one.
The new hero is the one who conceives of the world as a unified, harmonious whole and works towards it. Fueled, he thinks, by our increasing global interconnectedness.
Now here's another paradox. He sees the current global power struggles, the arming of large blocs, as a necessary step towards unity.
It seems completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? But yes, he suggests this dangerous phase is actually leading towards an eventual absolute global supremacy, the end of major wars, because one power, biologically selected through struggle, finally achieves dominance and imposes a form of unity.
Wow. That's a challenging perspective. Okay, now he returns to the limits of science when dealing with the spiritual.
He uses that analogy of the unmoving statue. You can probe it physically, scientifically, but if the phenomenon isn't material, if it's spiritual, beyond our senses, current science hits a wall.
So some realities are just outside its current scope.
That's his argument. Material tools can't measure the immaterial.
And he offers a source of comfort in troubled times, drawing on a maternal archetype.
Yes, contrasting the external focus of materialism with an inner spiritual reality. He describes the collective soul hearing the mother of Christ, offering protection during affliction.
Connecting this to deep instincts.
Turning to ancestral mother ideas. Conserving life force in apocalyptic times. It's a deep psychological and spiritual response.
Now, he gives a stark characterization of materialism.
He equates it with rationalism in a limited sense, egoism, brute force, destruction, pain. It's the philosophy of the involuted, he says, relying on base instincts, unable to grasp higher realities. Spiritualism has the opposite traits.
And he looks behind the flags of modern ideologies.
And sees, often, not lofty ideals, but raw egoism. The desire for domination, personal, family, national, voracious egoism, he calls it.
And widespread lying as a tool.
Yes, lying to conquer, to dominate. He sees it as pervasive.
He describes the current state as almost a return to a more primitive struggle.
Homo homini lupus man is a wolf to man, a barely disguised bestial reality where alliances are purely opportunistic, based on self-interest.
And this extends from individuals to nations.
The psychology of the wolf pack forms dominant coalitions. He insists these social phenomena are fundamentally biological at their root.
And attempts to impose order by force alone are futile.
If the underlying lack of discipline stemming from materialism isn't addressed, yes. Nations unite for attack and defense, forming utilitarian group spirits. But lasting order requires more. It requires a superior power based on more than just strength.
Yes, superior in intelligence, capacity, and goodness, found in the Superman, the genius, hero, saint figures who are currently rare, he admits. Now, he questions the logic of seeking wealth through aggression.
It seems illogical to him. How can you get wealthy by mutual theft and destruction? That dries up the sources of wealth, which come from peaceful labor, trust, collaboration.
He advocates for seeking well-being through lifting everyone up.
Through a general elevation of the economic level via harmonious work. not by tearing each other down.
And what about attempts to destroy faith?
He believes trying to destroy God, metaphorically, actually opens the paths of heaven. You can't kill faith with force. Oppression often strengthens it, creates martyrs, satisfies the urge to preach.
It backfires. Now, he critiques the class struggle model specifically.
He sees it as a system requiring an endless supply of victims. It risks becoming parasitic, destroying the peaceful producer it feeds on.
Because it relies on force and constant conquest.
Yes, it needs ever new conquests, leading to more aggression internally and externally until it hits a biological imbalance and collapses under its own weight.
But he contrasts this reliance on force with the power of righteousness.
He quotes himself, "One man who possesses God in his soul is stronger than 10,000 men. Indeed, than all men who do not possess him."
Meaning the evolved individual has a different kind of strength?
Yes, intelligence, understanding. They see the self-destructive path of those relying solely on force, while the involuted, blinded by their methods, don't.
And these destructive systems inevitably lead downward.
Towards an abyss, yes. They demand increasing sacrifice, hit a limit, and can't easily reverse course without neutralizing all the harm done. Abyss calls to abyss, it accelerates.
Yet even amidst this potential chaos, he sees a purpose in the present.
Always. The present, however messy, is forging the future. Even if those involved don't understand the larger purpose, focused only on immediate gains or destruction.
He suggests many current structures might just disappear.
Leaving only unexpected remnants. He believes life itself will eventually rebel against the purely machine-like aspects of modern systems and seek freedom in the spirit.
And science will play a role in this shift.
He predicts science, initially used to bolster materialism, will eventually reverse course. It will demonstrate the reality of the soul, of God guiding us onto spiritual paths.
But first, we have to face the consequences of our current mindset.
The prolonged absorption of materialistic psychology and destructive science must bear its fruits, he says. The consequences are inescapable.
And how long can force make up for a lack of understanding?
He questions it. How long can brute force substitute for the intelligence that recognizes trust and collaboration are essential for social well-being? Violence-based systems are instruments of destruction. They must eventually dissolve into chaos and loss.
But even materialism can serve a higher purpose in the end.
Paradoxically, yes. He suggests it can be seen as God's tool to clear the way, to open the doors to a new civilization of the spirit, precisely because it fails so spectacularly.
Okay. He then talks about two realities existing simultaneously right now.
Yes, the apparent, superficial reality destruction, misery, lies, hatred, and the deeper, real reality, eternal development, spiritual growth.
And he sees the best people being persecuted by the worst.
Currently, yes. Those who hold higher spiritual values are often targeted by those focused only on material goals. He calls it the hour of evil, characterized by negation and subversion.
But are people really in control of these historical movements?
Largely not, he argues. Even those who think they're acting freely are mostly obeying deeper instincts, manipulated by the laws of life.
So history isn't random or just driven by leaders?
No. It's driven by currents of collective thought, felt unconsciously by the masses. Leaders are effective only when they tap into and express these currents.
And he brings back that law of balance, of compensation.
Yes, the release spring analogy. Action and reaction. Life seeks equilibrium, leading to unexpected outcomes through the compensation of contraries. It's not about endless repetition of the same state.
So true progress isn't just more of the same.
No, it's often a new beginning based on different principles. He sees the current focus on force and cunning as reflecting an involuted state where animal traits dominate. Honesty, merit, goodness, intelligence used for good, these are undervalued now.
And ignoring universal norms has consequences.
Absolutely. You can't desire a harmonious garden while acting in ways that create a minefield through selfishness. True winners in the long run aren't conquerors exploiting others. They fulfill a different biological function, contributing to common goals.
He then paints a picture of a potentially better world.
Imagine a world of fraternal comprehension, where people can express their qualities freely, reducing friction and suffering, freeing up energy.
Gains in time and energy when we're not just focused on survival.
Exactly. He uses that parable of three people in different social positions if they change how they interact, adopting a fraternal, collaborative spirit. Everyone's outcome improves dramatically. Joy increases. Pain vanishes.
So evolution naturally leads towards happiness.
That's the core message of the parable. The evolutionary path is the path to happiness.
But he describes the present time as disoriented.
Yes, a descending phase characterized by disorientation, stemming from involution. The present focuses on reason and analysis, but the coming era will rely more on intuition and synthesis.
He critiques our current world's strengths and weaknesses.
Strong in disorientation and destruction, he says, but weak in understanding fundamental questions about life, death, the universe's purpose. Instinct guides animals, but humans often act without fully grasping the consequences.
Faith is vague, reason is limited in this state.
Yes, we need clarity, demonstrable truth for genuine understanding, he argues.
And yet, he sees an unexpected convergence happening.
Materialism, exploring matter deeply, surprisingly rediscovers the spirit. And religions, seeing scientific confirmation, might find the soul defined in terms they once opposed.
Because truth is ultimately unified.
Yes. Those genuinely fighting for truth can't be divided by sects, parties, egoism. Division aligns with Satan, involution, death, while unity aligns with reciprocal love, with God life.
And he believes future generations will see our current conflicts differently.
They'll see the immense stupidity of killing, understanding that destroying the body doesn't eliminate the person. The dead remain, perhaps more alive, and will treat us as we treated them. A sobering thought.
History progresses slowly, often through pain.
Yes, the current darkness requires terrible trials for even small gains in understanding. Wisdom isn't learned secondhand. It requires personal suffering.
He sees destiny as logical, predictable if we knew everything.
Yes, leading to a timeless present where intuition sees the whole pattern. But the challenge is grasping all the complex individual and collective forces at play. We act haphazardly, focused on immediate interests, ignoring the long view.
And he predicts a future where thought is more open.
He uses the image of thought trapped in warring, towered castles now. The future will force open the doors. Life will be lived in the open air. Old logical structures become prisons.
And science will eventually prove the spirit exists.
As an organism of individualizable forces expressing itself dynamically, that's his prediction.
Now he tackles that huge question. Why suffering in a world governed by a perfect, good God?
How can pain be condemned if the divine law is perfect? To understand, he says, we must connect our present state to our past actions, our history.
Without understanding our destiny, we can't understand our pain.
Exactly. The idea that the strong just abandon the weak doesn't explain the purpose of suffering. In an ordered universe, the crushed weak must serve some function, not just be evolutionary failures to be discarded.
And true happiness isn't just about pleasing the senses.
No, it's about adhering to the divine will, understanding and observing God's law. We have the instinct for happiness, it's our right, but the distance isn't divine cruelty.
It's the interplay of God's love and our freedom.
Yes, God allows us to choose hatred, evil, even though it means rejecting happiness and choosing pain. Freedom is dangerous, but necessary, so we seek God spontaneously, out of love, not coercion.
God wants to be loved freely.
Recognized as a good father, yes. So intervention is indirect, not vengeful punishment, but a kind of withdrawal when we err, leading to disharmony, paying the natural consequences of ignorance. If God didn't offer this indirect path to redemption, we'd self-destruct.
And he sees the story of humanity's fall as real.
Not just a myth. Humanity's revolt and fall into suffering is the real basis of our life and destiny, reflected in those ancient stories.
So how do we overcome pain?
Not by inflicting it on others. That just accumulates harmful reactions. We overcome it by counteracting its causes with goodness and love.
He critiques our distorted sense of justice.
Yeah, sanctifying revenge just increases pain, makes earth a realm of evil. The cause is our spirit of revolt, reckless action. Pain itself, paradoxically, is God's providence, the only path to redemption when we've gone astray.
And our suffering should resonate beyond earth.
He suggests it does, reaching more evolved beings.
And the overall trend is always towards unification.
Yes. Overcoming illusions leads towards unity. Social life trends towards larger units. We should seek unification everywhere. Avoid division. That's where progress lies, aligning with God's ways.
And science, despite its initial path, is actually leading back to spirit.
Yes, initially a banner of materialism, its own progress now points towards spirit, back towards God's law. He expects more revelations from science. Future generations will correct many of our current errors, whose negative effects we're still feeling.
Now, he identifies pride as particularly destructive.
Pride, affirming the ego against God, against life, destroys clear vision. Our guiding power leads to accumulated errors, unbalanced action, a downward path, Anything against God's law only produces destruction.
leading the rebellious spirit towards.
Form, sensuality, greed. Losing itself in the relative, the particular, forgetting the whole.
But error leads to pain, and pain leads to evolution.
Yes, through pain, tomorrow's suffering is reduced as we learn and evolve. Pain purifies.
And selfishness leads to perverse outcomes.
False solutions saturate our lives, producing evil and pain because we can't act harmoniously. Flawed thoughts lead to flawed actions, sowing negative consequences.
Even possessions can become toxic.
If approached with selfishness and greed, yes. Instead of peace, needed for enjoyment, selfishness brings violence, war, misery, pain. Possessions become poisoned and poison us.
He returns to that idea of a free-flowing divine substance.
Life is immersed in this ocean of divine substance. Its vitality depends on circulation, exchange, communion.
And egoism blocks this flow.
Selfishly hoarding creates barriers, renders the substance inert. It's like God denies us because we separate ourselves from the source. True enrichment comes from limitless fraternal giving, not avarice.
Okay. Now he turns a critical eye towards modern medicine.
He thinks modern psychology's focus on independence has negatively impacted medicine. An overly materialistic, hedonistic orientation has led science astray, lacking a higher ethical purpose.
Believing ourselves masters of the world while trying to be objective.
It lacks a true, higher goal, he argues. Prioritizing the ego over God leads us off track.
And life's way of teaching is through consequences.
Yes, letting us err and suffer the results is more effective, ultimately, than just telling us what to do. Experience is the best teacher, even painful experience.
And he sees danger in some modern medical approaches.
Disoriented treatments threaten our organic constitution, especially in civilized races that rely on them heavily. Life is a battle requiring effort, but over-reliance on external aids weakens our natural defenses.
Immediate advantages might hide long-term harm.
Exactly, leading to increased organic vulnerability down the line.
He believes the body has its own wisdom. Maybe illness isn't just malfunction.
Right. Could disease be the body creating terrain for specific healing functions? Maybe illness is a state where life puts us under its care for healing, not just waiting for a doctor.
Prioritize nature's wisdom over the doctor's.
Reverse the current imbalance, yes. Medicine should follow nature's wisdom, which expresses itself through symptoms and intelligent war operation against disease.
So suppressing symptoms could be harmful.
It can disrupt the body's defense strategy, potentially leading to losing the battle.
He proposes a new concept of health.
Not just absence of symptoms, but harmonious functioning of the whole organism. A holistic approach, considering the individual's entire history and evolution.
Which requires a more evolved type of practitioner.
Yes, someone with greater sensitivity, capable of using the intuitive method of the future, attuning to the vibratory dynamics of the phenomenon, going beyond deduction and induction.
And he critiques the influence of propaganda in medicine.
The public lacks understanding. The sheer number of pharmaceuticals suggests industry and empiricism might outweigh true science sometimes.
Propaganda creates artificial needs.
For often useless or harmful products, driven by profit. The number of truly essential medicines is small, he insists. Much is based on falsehood, exploiting trusts and laziness.
But there's a deeper healing power available.
Within the universal transformation, the divine power in all things lies an inexhaustible healing force. It can act therapeutically, even on the material level.
But the root causes are often spiritual.
Yes, requiring knowledge of the spirit's history, evolution, pathology. Even physical traumas can have spiritual origins.
His overall conclusion about our times.
We lack an orientation towards ultimate ends, towards meaning. He respects science and medicine, but urges wisdom in their use, caution about their immense power.
Now he addresses the fundamental issue of power and leadership in society.
Observing the psychology of authority. In our current biological phase, he says, power often belongs to the strongest, with selection favoring selfish imposition over moral excellence.
So an involuted humanity naturally follows forceful leaders.
Yes, it polarizes around individuals or classes capable of dominance through force.
But more evolved individuals serve a different function.
Yes, those with goodness, spirit, they contribute to prosperity, progress, not domination. They attract followers, but not in organizations based on material force.
And historical events are driven by unseen impulses.
Unknown even to the main actors. History unfolds according to the evolutionary level of the people involved.
And there are natural checks on power.
Strong leaders who betray their mission through tyranny are often eliminated by even stronger forces. Automatic biological reactions, he calls them. When rulers live only for themselves, they begin their own demise.
So biological forces are the real source of power?
They grant and remove it, aligning the level of rulers and ruled. A useless leader gets discarded, regardless of their defenses.
And he sees a future evolution of collective consciousness.
Yes, moving beyond the current chaotic formative phase. At a higher level, with a formed collective consciousness, people will understand their duties and functions. Power will then be held by those with a sense of duty and capacity, not by force.
He describes the cycles of social change.
When one stratum fails, others rise. Initially, the most involuted, strong but lacking intelligence surge forward, but they're eventually replaced by more adapted elements capable of sustained rule, driving evolution.
Life entrusts leadership to those who can lead forward.
A class still connected to the masses, but evolved enough to guide them.
So command is open to all, but reserved for the most adapted.
Yes, and they're kept as long as they perform well. This cycle of rising and falling is a chain of redemptive struggles.
And life drives evolution through this struggle.
Constantly hammering the masses biologically, politically, economically, intellectually to spark creativity and drive evolution. Life is wise and just, always doing the best with the available elements for each population's level.
And spiritual forces are more important than numbers.
Nations are built on the spiritual forces of the masses. In a world based on force, not understanding, what can you expect? Those who gain power are naturally inclined to enjoy its fruits.
He sees the current crisis as fundamentally biological.
Yes, a crisis of civilization. The liquidation of ethics, focus on the immediate, is the conclusion of an evolutionary phase destined to collapse. The current nervous energy is life raising its temperature for a desperate push forward.
And the goal is to move beyond rationality towards intuition.
The ultimate goal is approaching the conception and sensation of God, transcending rational processes, developing the mature use of synthetic intuition, completing rationalism with conscious faith.
He describes the present transformation as apocalyptic.
Yes, the future order, emerging from this mix of old and new, decay and germination, is unknown, like primordial chaos building our world. Masses in delirium, the few who see watching anxiously.
But the spirit must triumph eventually.
Yes, but the capital sin of our time was humanity making itself the center, losing touch with the divine, losing itself.
And historical movements, once started, are hard to stop.
They follow a fatal trajectory. Those who defied the law, tried to destroy God, have destroyed themselves. Consequences are inescapable. Force meets force, greed leads to misery, pride to humility.
All true paths lead back to God.
Ultimately, yes, that's the single center.
And the future would be predictable if we had complete knowledge.
Yes, chance, chaos. These are concepts of the involuted mind. Grasping the vast panorama is for higher evolutionary degrees.
He emphasizes the law of equilibrium again.
Life compensates. The more often something happens, the less likely it is to continue indefinitely. The law is compensation of contraries, not accumulation of the same.
Balancing joy and pain in destiny.
Like the white and black marbles tending towards a median balance in our current state, life providentially rebuilds this balance.
And our past convictions shape our present instincts.
Forming future actions unconsciously but justly. We consciously build our new life based on matured understanding. We are the consequence of ourselves, freely building our destiny, carrying our history, continuously correcting it.
This allows analysis of the imponderable.
Yes, penetrating the unknown, applying to individuals and peoples.
He describes people as force systems.
Individualized by a dominant tendency. The outer reality is just a transient garment, a stage for these forces to develop. Don't mistake the form for the reality.
And the law of complementary deficiencies drives us.
Every one-sided development creates a need for its opposite, for completeness through experience. That's why we feel displaced. Earth is a training ground. Our deficiencies push us to seek balance.
Now, he looks at procreation, linking biology and economics.
Contrasting animal detachment with human parental commitment, needing organization. Procreation and economics are tightly linked in civilized societies, influencing reproduction itself. Higher living standards can make population maintenance harder.
And there's a tension around disciplining love for children.
Yes, the need to discipline love for the child's sake versus the individual resisting that discipline. Children pay for increased care through sacrifices in quantity-quality.
He uses the unmarried mother example again to show conflicting views.
Society condemns her for social economic reasons. Life might approve her following natural laws, age, love, resulting in robust children. Nature often compensates, weakening the protected, strengthening the challenged.
And the struggle for existence now is more psychological?
Yes, the ego clinging to its limited world. Nature, aiming for long-term goals, might seem pitiless to the individual focused on immediate gain over the race's biological victory,
Love itself is seen as a cosmic force in conflict.
driving individual expansion and species unification. Victory in this struggle means the conqueror flourishes at others' expense. Defeat can mean decay, but maybe peace through depletion. Nature's goal is victory, ascent towards joy.
And mystical renunciation, is it conscious choice or deeper drive?
He questions it. Maybe it's an evolutionary drive towards more evolved forms of loving. Mysticism and renunciation are linked. Sexual and mystical love seem rivalrous. Renunciation might be an effect of mysticism, a necessary negation for higher effort.
He defines the superhuman of the spirit.
Like animals driven by hunger sex, some individuals are in a higher phase focused on progress. Hero, genius, martyr, saint, mystic precursors of evolution, universal biological types.
And perspective matters in understanding sublimation.
Yes, the meaning differs if viewed from an earthly involuted perspective versus an upward evolutionary one.
And universal love is the path to this superhuman state.
Sensing the conscious universe, or unconscious, through love that's touching the superhuman, approaching God. This love progresses from sexual to mystical. Blind abandonment to God, submission to life, opens the infinite, not rational calculation.
Renunciation is part of all love.
At its core, yes, joy comes from evolving towards God, love. It's achieved only through love, involving altruism and negating egoism. Overcoming ego, surrendering to God's law, brings inner joy.
Cosmic love fulfills life's first law.
Love at any level exalts cosmic life. God is love, creates in love from pure physical love, sacramental foundation of family, to spiritual love.
And there's an instinct driving us beyond the ego.
Yes, love compels us to break ego's barriers, risking security. The rational ego wants safety. The irrational unconscious yearns for higher goals, revealing God's thought with immense wisdom.
Love transforms consciousness.
From rational to cosmic, involving self-surrender, themes, disinterestedness, self-abnegation, expansion from human to divine. Highest activities often happen beyond conscious will via instinct, intuition, reaching super-rational planes.
And happiness lies beyond pain.
It's the state we yearn for, always ready for us. The drama. A barrier of pain separates us, created by shattering our egoism. The tragic illusion is chasing joy directly. True happiness lies beyond traversing pain. The evangelical inversion.
Evolved love is supersensible.
Yes, chosen ones experience universal love, basis of spiritual fecundity, a special mission. Life extends beyond the human-animal plane science sees. Sexuality transforms with biological type in higher phases.
Chastity becomes affirmation in universal love.
Renunciation on the animal-human plane is a condition for greater affirmation in universal love on the spiritual superhuman plane. It's more than negation, it's affirmation, overcoming.
But evolved virtues have risks.
Reaching a new evolutionary level presents a choice, healthy path or pathological opposite, vice instead of virtue. Each is subject to the law of their plane. For most, the uncalled, disciplined carnal love in marriage is sufficient.
How does the evolved interact with the involuted mass regarding love?
The involuted realm involves struggle, rivalry for vital satisfaction. The involuted might tolerate the evolved's limitations, renunciation, because it means one less rival.
There's a utilitarian instinct in venerating saints.
Appreciating the absence of a rival.
Yeah.
You only hate a rival. The world understands the negative aspect, renunciation, and might reward it out of self-interest.
Oh.
I give, so you give.
He mentions Kundalini and chakras physiologically.
Acknowledges physiological explanations for mystical ecstasy, anger, but insists intuition, faith, experience point to transcendental elements beyond science.
Chastity is supersexual love, biologically justified.
Maybe it's a stabilization, a new type of love active only on its higher level. Hormonal changes in mystical states might be parallel organic repercussions, not pathology. It's a biological justification for chastity in some.
But the mystic's ascent is misunderstood.
Yes, due to the contrast between normal and evolved psychology, different laws of life. Renunciation, unsuitable for most, can be prerequisite for higher passions, expansive divine love in the superior individual.
Spiritual ascent brings independence from the body.
Yes, increasingly. Fear of death lessens.
Yes.
Physical senses dull, intensive senses sharpen, allowing exploration of other world.
And he claims experimental confirmation.
Through his own life, applying gospel principles yielded positive results consistently. experimental validation of his previous work's principles.
He sees his work developing systematically.
Subsequent volumes develop abstract scientific aspects, the great synthesis, others the practical human. The seemingly unorthodox thought corresponds scientifically and rationally to reality, he argues.
And there's a biological imperative now for a new civilization.
Yes, humanity must evolve now, preceding a new civilization in the third millennium. Forgotten concepts must erupt with power now, beyond religions, into the realities of struggle and pain.
He sees unforeseen consequences from his earlier work.
An earlier promise unexpectedly led to current developments.
And life demands conscious acceptance now.
Opening doors to a new civilization requires conscious acceptance of rationally demonstrated truths. Conscious refusal has inevitable consequences.
The understanding offered is unitary.
Global, unitary. Diverse problems converge on the same central understanding.
And thought evolves continuously, like life.
Yes. He describes the conceptual atmosphere surrounding him.
And his method of recording concepts changed.
From direct inspiration to more internalized assimilation and transmission.
Finally, he introduces the great law of impersonal life.
Survival requires losing oneself in the great current of life, de-individualizing, depersonalizing like selfless love.
Placing oneself at the center leads to death.
Separation, death. We enjoy life more by thinking less of ourselves. This law holds true throughout the unified universe.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've journeyed through Ubaldi's vision, this profound interconnectedness, the push and pull of evolution and involution, and that ultimate movement towards unity and spirit.
And thinking about your goal, listener, of getting a comprehensive view, hopefully you now have a richer lens to look through when considering conflict progress, seeing it all as part of a much larger connected story.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to maybe chew on. How does this perspective, this idea of universal unity and the mechanics of evolution, how does that shift your understanding of your own life, your own challenges, and the big challenges humanity faces today? Is inner transformation maybe the real key to unlocking that more unified future Ubaldi envisions?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really encourage you to keep exploring these powerful ideas on your own.